Little addendum here that I want to add before this video starts. The first couple days of this video that I go over are a little bit crunchy in terms of audio. I didn't realize this until I was way after into the editing phase that it picked up on my mic wrong. I apologize for that. I'm really sorry. I've tried to fix it as much as I can in post, but it's just not going to be perfect. So apologies for that, and I'll let you get on to the video. Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am back for my LPL Week 9 overview, analysis, and of course, at the end, my updated power rankings. Definitely an interesting week of LPL action, but as we all know, it is certainly not a short one. So, I don't want to waste too much time on this intro. I want to go ahead and jump right into the games, but before we do that, I am going to quickly ask you, if you had any predictions for the week, if you had any predictions for the games, if you had any predictions for some players, let me know what those were down in the comment section below. The game you were most looking forward to, the player you were most looking forward to seeing, maybe the matchup you were most looking forward to seeing, all that stuff. I love chatting up with you guys, so leave that down in the comment section below. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into our first day of LPL Week 9 action. And day 1 was kicked off with a series here between Anyone's Legend and RNG. And RNG was able to pick up the 2-0 win here pretty easy. Both games were not particularly close. Both very much RNG from the beginning. And both were kind of just Xiaohu from the beginning. He had a very, very phenomenal series here. He continues to have a really good summer. I think a lot of people were really worried about him in the summer. Obviously, Spring Xiaohu is a meme at this point. But Xiaohu has actually had a really, really good split. Maybe not as good as Ming. I think you could kind of put those two on the same level in terms of who's been the factor for RNG. But Xiaohu and Ming, I think, have both been genuinely phenomenal so far in summer. And this series just encapsulates that. I think Xiaohu was really, really great on that Talia in Game 1. I mean, being absolutely everywhere on the map while also not sacrificing his lane advantage that he, quite frankly, obliterated Forge in. And then in Game 2, he goes to the Lissandra, a much more passive pick, and he's actually able to be really, really aggressive here into the Akali because of the matchup here. And then I think Lissandra Wukong is a really good 2v2 to actually fight with. So you're seeing some plays between them. You're seeing him move bot lane to help out the Sivir and the Rakan. You're seeing him move top lane to punish the Jax for overextending. There are a lot of really good plays here from Xiaohu, and he's very, very clearly my player of the game. But everybody in the series actually played really well for RNG. I don't want to take it away from anybody. Ming was genuinely phenomenal in Game 1 on the Lulu, really helping Gala have a pretty successful game on the Kog'Maw. And then Wei, I thought, was fantastic in the series as well. Breathe got a lot of kills in that second game because ADZ was very much overextended a lot. But just generally speaking, like, I thought RNG was the better team by a considerable margin in this game. And obviously, we would have said that going into the year, but Anyone's Legend, I think, has surprised a lot of people so far this year. It looks like now that they're going up against a bit tougher competition, though, it's maybe not there. They struggled. AL struggled. There's really no other way to put it. Forge got decimated in this series. He just simply isn't on Xiaohu's level. He's not going to be my dud of the series, so that one is going to go to ZDZ in the top lane, who just played it bad. Like, there's really no other way to put it. I've actually been a lot lower on ZDZ. I think a lot of people have been calling him, one of the more interesting young top laners in the LPL. I just, quite frankly, haven't seen it. He's had some good moments, but I think a lot of this team success has come around Xiaohao, Cho, and Betty really playing really, like, above their pay grade so far this season and being really good at beating the lower tier teams. I just don't think ZDZ has really stepped up in that same way for me. He was overextended a lot, not only in Game 1 here on the Gwen, where he went in over and over again. He was the quote-unquote engage of this team, even though you have a Xin Zhao, even though you have a Sylas. And he just died over and over and over again. So, not particularly fun to watch there. And then Game 2 on the Jax was just not a good game. He was clearly trying to force an advantage for his team in that side lane, and it just was not working out. So, ZDZ is going to get my dud of the series here. That's not to say everybody else was better. Like I said, Forge was not particularly good. Betty and Cho just got outplayed by Gala and Ming by a considerable margin. You could say the same thing for Xiaohao against Wei, where he just wasn't on the same level. Like, they just were not the same level caliber player throughout this. So, outlook-wise for Anyone's Legend, we talked about this last week and the week before, where it's like, okay, now they're really starting to get into that meat of the schedule. They unfortunately have to close out the year playing pretty much all of the top teams in the league, and they've really, really struggled. If they continue to struggle, they actually might force themselves out of a playoff position, which would be absolutely tragic for this roster. But they're sitting at 7-6 after this series. Obviously, they'll have one more later in the week that we'll talk about, but they're sitting at 7-6 after the series. That's really not the best position to be in at all, and they're actually only one game over 500 in terms of game score as well. They are very, very close to actually knocking themselves out of playoffs, and you just really hope they can hang on to that. As for RNG, they're one of the top teams in the league. You could really make a case that they're number 2. You could make a case that they're number 3. You could make a case that they're number 1. I think, in that range, it's really, really tough to get a difference between the teams. For me, they are very consistent, and I do worry a little bit if they have the ceiling to beat the rest of the teams in the playoffs right now, just in terms of, if the other teams are at their best. I don't know how well they match up against, top esports per se, but outside of that, I think that they're, in a great position to beat just about anybody, just like they did in spring on their way to a spring title, and I'm really excited for this team because obviously players like Xiaohu, players like Ming, it's really exciting to see them continue to be some of the best in the world and continue to show that RNG is a premier organization here in the LPL. Moving on to our second game here of day 1 action. We had a fun one between Ultra Prime and FunPlus Phoenix. And FPX does take the 2-0 series win here pretty confidently. Game 2 was definitely interesting to watch. But misplays from both sides aside, it was a good game. It was definitely entertaining, and I highly recommend it. FPX is able to take both games, mostly off the back of their solo laners actually playing really, really well. And obviously, the solo laners have kind of been the up and down of this team so far this year. Summit, I think, coming in has really invigorated the team, and especially someone like Clid really unlocked his game a lot. And then Care has he was down at the beginning of the year, but I think he's had a much better second half of the summer split. LWX and Hang are still good, but they really haven't been the focal carry points that I think a lot of people expected them to be for this team so far this year. But they were good in this series. Certainly some misplays from LWX, but we'll get to that later. Game 1 was definitely I would say a team effort mostly for FPX. They were just kind of the better team overall. Summit had a lot of gold on the gangplank. He was able to do a lot of damage. Lissandra did a very good job here stopping the Aphelios from being able to take over the game. And then LWX was doing a ton of damage here on the Lucian. And then game 2 was really, really interesting. Ultra Prime indexes very heavily into getting the Zoe behind, getting Care behind on the Zoe early on in the game. And they succeed to an extent, but Care actually just plays it so well, especially towards the back half of this game, basically hitting every single bubble and making it really difficult for Ultra Prime to actively do anything in a team fight. So Care is going to get my player of the series here. He was good on the Lissandra in game 1, even if he wasn't the focal carry point. And he was great on the Zoe in game 2, where he really was the player that I think most influenced that endgame there, which was relatively close, even if he got camped a lot early on. Like I said, Summit was also really, really good here on the gangplank, especially in game 1, a very fun one. And then Gwen in game 2 was relatively okay into Zoom's Kennen. Zoom didn't play game 2 particularly well, but it's always fun to see Summit actually have a good series on 2 games that, quite frankly, aren't NAR. So that's always a good sign. And then I want to point out LWX, who played really well in game 1, and obviously Hang played well in both games, I'll say, but LWX was really trying his best to just die in game 2 on that Lucian pick. Obviously, he has so much survivability on Lucian, and it just didn't seem like he wanted to use any of it. Very much going frontline Lucian, definitely an interesting strategy. But on the flip side, someone like Elk on the other team kind of indexed pretty heavily into trying to one-shot Summit here in the top lane on Aphelios, trying to just burst him down and kill him instantly, but just didn't have the damage. You're not release Aphelios anymore. It's not 200 years, and unfortunately, he's not able to do that. He was kind of their carry towards the back half of that game, and they lose the game because of that. So definitely an interesting end game here, but overall, I thought both of the bot laners played kind of meh overall. But as for Ultra Prime, nobody on the team played great. Like I said, I thought Elk did a pretty good job of getting gold early in the game, even if he didn't use it to its fullest extent towards the back half of the game, especially when you're on that Aphelios. But done of the game for me, or done of the series, is pretty easily going to go to Zoom, who just continues to be the weak link of Ultra Prime. There's really no other way to put it. You could make a point that I think Zoom has been maybe the worst top laner in the LPL this year. He certainly was not good on top esports. He comes over to Ultra Prime, and he has been just as bad on Ultra Prime, a team that, quite frankly, isn't good at all. It's not like he has a bunch of superstar players around him, and he's the one being a negative like he was for top. Like, this is a team that isn't good, and he still looks like the worst player on the team. So, definitely not a good sign. Outside of that, Meownu played for this series. Great. Whoever you want to play at support, I don't really think it matters for Ultra Prime at this point. I think they want to see what they have out of Meow. But, Cryan does some interesting things. I thought Hacker played the game 2 early game relatively okay, at least trying to gain an advantage somewhere on the Lee Sin pick that I think is, I've talked in many videos, a waste of a pick. But, again, Hacker got to that point where it was like, oh, wait, I have the gold at 10 minutes? Like, the game's over. Like, we can't win because I will not have any damage after 15 minutes. So, definitely unfortunate there for Ultra Prime, but that's what happens when you pick Lee Sin. So, FPX walks out of this. Outlook-wise, Ultra Prime's not good. They're a bottom 3 team in the LPL, even with the talent of Elk. And, Cryan can be good, and I think Hacker certainly had his moments, certainly his bad moments as well, but they have talent. They're not going to be able to put it together. When Zoom's playing like this, you don't really have a solid support here. Mid-jungle don't really have any sort of synergy together. They're just a bottom 3 team, no questions asked. FPX, I think, is really up and down. They're sitting at 6 and 8. And they're really looking at themselves as, like, they should be a playoff team in terms of, especially how they played over the past, 4 or 5 weeks. They started off so poorly here that they really dug themselves a genuinely giant hole to get out of. But it is possible that they are going to get out of it and put themselves in a position to make playoffs. But they're basically going to have to win out to give themselves the opportunity to do that. Jumping into day 2 here, and we start off day 2 with a series between 2 teams kind of at the bottom of the standings here. Of course, I'm talking about Rare Atom taking on Invictus Gaming. And Invictus is going to pick up the 2-1 win. They are actually, I don't want to say it, on a little bit of a win streak here, which I don't think a lot of people expected, but it is, of course, all against bottom teams, so I'm not going to try and overreact too much to this news and information. I will note, for Invictus Gaming, for IG, this team has looked a ton better ever since they added Mole here to the mid lane. Mole is a player that obviously, I think a lot of people who watch the LPL broadcast have to know is underrated purely because Lyric is, I think, genuinely in love with the man. But he comes in here and he's actually been really good for IG. He's been a big reason why this team has been able to consistently beat a lot of the bottom teams and why they're probably closer to, say, like 13 than they are to 17, which is, it's a start for a team that I think was around 17 all year long. So they moved to 4-9 here. It's a good win. Mole is going to get player of the series here. He's actually gotten player of the series in all 3 of the series that he has won for IG, in my opinion, like for me. And that is pretty awesome. I think he's been the catalyst for this Invictus Gaming team to be good. He is really good on these champions that I think are super meta right now. I'm mostly talking about the Talia, which he played in games 1 and 2. He had a great game 1 here on the Talia. The game 2 was alright. He was still making a lot of plays, but unfortunately, Rare Atom just got a little too far ahead. Leon got his Nidalee, and he was able to take over that early game. Was able to get Strive Gold, was able to get iBoy Gold, and then from that point onward, it was over. And then in game 3, it was really a combo effort, I think, from jungle mid here. Jun did a really good job of controlling the whole map here on the Wukong. And I thought Mole did a good job of making sure that the enemy team didn't have a lot of opportunities to re-engage on that Zoe. So some really good play, I think, overall from the jungle mid duo. They have definitely been the bright spot for Invictus Gaming, although they weren't the only ones who played well in this series. I thought Zika actually had a pretty underratedly good series here, if not game 2. But his games 1 and 3 were good. And then I thought On played well overall, which, he's continued to do, I think, on this win streak. He's a relatively okay AD carry. I'm still definitely not sold on Wink as your starting support, but he's something. He's not the worst. Well, maybe he's the worst, but he's not, definitely the worst, right? WE would certainly have a word with the worst support in the league, and I think Rare Atom might also have a case for that as well, but overall, Invictus just doing what they can. For Rare Atom, this team sucks. Like, they made playoffs last split, obviously, I've talked about that a lot, and they lost whatever spark that they had. Every other team around them got better, and they kind of fell to where, I think, I can't speak for everybody, but where I predicted them to be all along, which is towards the bottom of the standings. I never thought this team had really the talent to overperform like they did in spring. They got pretty lucky in the sense of, I think the same way that anyone's legend got lucky for a lot of this year, and I think we're seeing them kind of crash back down to earth with this roster right now. My dud of the series is going to go to Cube in the top lane. I've given it to 3 top laners in a row. There's really no correlation there. I just don't like to see awful Kennen play. And unfortunately, that's what we got here in Game 3. His Kennen was not so good. He got completely bodied by the Fiora in the Game 1 here on the Sejuani, which again is not a particularly great Sejuani matchup, but overall just still something. Like, you know, you don't want to blind pick yourself in that regard. Like, Zika had full control of that matchup. His Game 2 was okay. He still wasn't great in Game 2 on the Jax. Tried to create side lane pressure here, and he linked up with Nidalee pretty well early on in the game, but wasn't really able to do a lot with it later. We're actually seeing that as kind of a trend with Jax players, is they a lot of times aren't working out here, and so I don't know if I'm as high on Jax as I think a lot of other people are. We just haven't seen it be as successful as I think a lot of people have expected it to be, but he wasn't the only one who played bad. Strive had a really bad Game 1 here, just got completely outplayed by Mole on the Taliyah in terms of global. Obviously, he's on the Azir, he's never going to be able to match the Taliyah's roam pressure, but unfortunately, that created so many advantages for Invictus that it was basically game over at that point. And then outside of the game where Leon really took over on the Nidalee, he was probably the worst player in this series. I don't want to give him dud of the series because I thought he was the reason that they won Game 2 for the most part here, but his Game 1 and Game 3 were probably the worst performances on Rare Addem, and so definitely something to point out that when Leon's not on Nidalee, he definitely struggles a lot more, and we're definitely seeing that. Zora was in for a lot of the series instead of Yuyanja here at the support position. Zora's probably better. He definitely played better in this series than we've seen Yuyanja play in the past few series, but I don't really know. Neither of them are that good, so really it's a toss-up. I would give Zora the playing time because at least it seems like him and iBoy have some level of cohesion together, where iBoy and Yuyanja definitely have not throughout the year. So that's basically it. Outlook-wise, both of these teams are not good. Neither of them are playoff teams. Let's not get it confused here. Invictus Game has really only beaten the bottom 3 teams in the league, so I'm definitely not overreacting to this, but Rare Addem is a bottom 3 team. They are not good. They're down there with WE, and I don't expect them to get a ton of more wins the rest of the season because they just, I don't really see them beating anybody else. As for Invictus Gaming, they're better than like the bottom grouping of teams. They've kind of proven that over the past few weeks, but I don't think they're much higher than that. They're still not on like a BLG's level in terms of, you know, trying to compete for a playoff spot. I think, you know, the top 12 feel very competitive and feel very much like all of them are vying for that last, you know, few playoff spots. Rare Addem's, or Invictus Gaming, I should say, is just not in that conversation, but they're going to be happy to be able to pick up some wins here. They're kind of in a conversation of their own, above the bottom, you know, few teams, but unfortunately below the teams that I think want to be competitive. All right, moving on to our second series here of Day 2 action. An interesting one and a good bounce back here as we see Bilibili Gaming taking on Victory 5. Certainly a fun series here as we get a 2-0 win from Victory 5, and they kind of get back on track. They were a little bit clumsy last week with a few of their games, going 0-2, definitely not what you wanted to see, but the bounce back here was pretty strong, and they're playing a team that I think is actually kind of doing okay right now. I know BLG has been kind of the laughingstock of the LPL so far this year, but I actually think they've been playing much better so far in the past few weeks than they were at the beginning of the year. Ever since they got their full lineup back in, you know, they realized that if they just play their actual players, that they'll get better together. I think they've looked a lot better, and V5 was really, really strong here. So overall, I think that there's this kid in the mid lane that's kind of okay for Victory 5, and he did pretty good in this series. I don't know, his name's something like Rookie, I don't know. Probably means he's a young player. The dude is unreal. Rookie just continues to be unreal. No matter how many times we count out this Victory 5 team, Rookie always proves us wrong, and he always proves that he is one of the best players in the world, as he had a great series here. Really good game on Lissandra in Game 1. Even better game on Sylas in Game 2. Sylas has always kind of been a Rookie pick, at least in my mind, a pick that he's really excelled on. And Rookie was really, really solid. He's clearly my player of the series. In this one, he was genuinely fantastic for Victory 5. He wasn't the only one who played really well, though. I want to give a big shout out to this bottom lane. 2 games of Lucian Nami, and obviously everybody knows how I feel about Lucian Nami. I think sometimes they can kind of bait your team into indexing too hard into early game. You can see picks like Lee Sin come out to try and support it early and to really get that early game lead, and I think that's indexing way too much into a part of the game that I think, quite frankly, just isn't as important right now. And I think we saw a really good draft around that for Victory 5. They did a good job of making sure that that wasn't the only, you know, that they didn't index so heavily into that lane that they really started to screw themselves. The Xin Zhao and the Poppy, I think, are really fine. Xin Zhao, I still think, is relatively weak, but I do think it's a better pick than Lee Sin. And then Poppy, I think, is the best jungler in the meta right now. I don't really think that there's a lot of debate for that, in my opinion. Poppy is fantastic. I think the only early indexing pick that you had here is the Renekton, but I still think Renekton has utility late game. He's got stuns, he's got things like that. He's gonna be tanky with that ultimate. He can do a lot more than I think someone like Lee Sin can, so I really do... I don't hate this draft from Victory 5, even though they take Lucian Nami twice here. I really do like the Sylas Lissandra double lane here. I actually think that is super positive for them. But in Game 2, I think it was a little bit more up in the air. But they do have the Poppy, and they have the Sylas, which I think are both really good picks here. So the Photic and PP God played well in this series. PP God's bubbles are absolutely absurd. Like, he can just actively predict where you're going to be, and it really is insane. He's really good on this champion, and not just on Nami, obviously. He's just really good on skill champions in general down there in the bot lane champions that, you know, you need to predict a little bit on, Nami being one of them, and he was really phenomenal here. Photic did a good job of keeping himself alive in these team fights. That's really the problem with Lucian late game, is it's really easy for Lucian to just get caught and die because of how low range he is. And I think Photic did a really good job of knowing his limits and knowing when he could go in and do damage and knowing when he couldn't go in and do damage. So that's really good to see. Obviously, those two have a phenomenal synergy together and make each other better. Zhao Bao in the jungle was also very good here, just controlling the map in general. As for BLG, meh. Like, they're meh. I think they're in that cluster of teams that really does want to fight for a playoff spot here. I just don't think they're necessarily in the lead for something like that. They're sitting at 5-9 now. My dud of the series is going to go to Bin. And again, I know it's another top laner, and I know their scores are probably going to look a little skewed. And that's not really why I'm giving them the dud of the series. I don't really go off of scores unless they're, like, abysmally awful. But man, like, these engages towards the back half of this game for Bin were just awful on the Camille. Him just going in, starting an engage and immediately dying and costing his team basically all of the resources and the fight in general is so bad from him. Like, we always talk about how weak side Bin is just not it, and I think this series kind of encapsulates that. Where if Bin doesn't have a ton of resources and gold, he can sometimes be a problem for the team, and that certainly happened here. He was not good. I don't think he was the only one who played bad. I thought Weiwei definitely got out-jungled in the series by Zhao Bao, which is definitely not what you want to see. It's not even Karsa in there, so not great there. And then Doggo, I thought, was way out of position too much here on the Zeri. Zeri's one of those picks where you can really keep yourself alive if you're good enough at it. And even with all the CC that Victory 5 have, he should have the tools to keep himself alive. He just wasn't doing it. So not a great game there from Doggo, and overall just not a great series from BLG. Outlook-wise, like I said, they're a team that's going to be trying to fight for a playoff spot, but they're probably in one of the worst positions of teams trying to fight for it. I think them and FPX are certainly kind of in bad, not great positions, and anyone's Legend, I think, can kind of be a part of that if they just continue to lose out, but they're really, I mean, BLG and FPX are really going to have to win out in order for them to put themselves in a good position to even try to make playoffs, and that's just a tough ask for a team that I think has been inconsistent all year long. As for Victory 5, they're a top 4 team. I had them at number 4 last week after a pretty bad week. This is a very good bounce back and something that I'm very happy to see in general. I'm not exactly sure what this means for the long run because BLG isn't exactly a top team in the league, but it is going to be very good that they were able to pick up this win and that they're at least starting to look kind of on the right track here with Rookie playing well, the bot lane playing well. I think that's definitely what you want to see out of this Victory 5 team after what happened last week. Moving on to our Day 3 games here, and kicking off Day 3, a battle between two teams that I think a lot of people were expecting to be closer than they actually are, and that is LGD Gaming and ThunderTalk Gaming. But ThunderTalk is actually pretty good, aren't they? LGD does their classic, they win Game 1 and then they lose Games 2 and 3. We've kind of seen that from them all year long. Luckily, they have a lineup in that I think I can get a little bit more behind here. Eric is in at AD carry. Eric is someone who I think we've seen a bit of throughout LPL history, and yeah, he's been okay during his time in the LPL. Nothing stellar, but nothing awful either. Definitely someone worth, I think, checking out here. And then Shadow. Thank God Shadow and Yeji are back in here. They are the much better jungle mid duo for LGD. They looked pretty good here in Game 1, even if it was Fearness's Fiora that was kind of taking over. But Games 2 and 3 were really not all that close here. Not entirely them to blame. Mostly this bottom lane just continuing to not be good for LGD. But we'll get to them later. We'll get to ThunderTalk first, as they actually looked pretty solid here. And where they continue to go right, I think, is UCal. And UCal, I think, is someone who I think a lot of people were really out on at the beginning of the year. But man, over the past 3 weeks, he's actually been very, very good. He's found a lot of comfort on the Rise, the Silas, the Azir. These 3 champs that I think he's known for, even if they're not all like hyper meta right now, which obviously I think Silas is very much meta right now, but even if they're not hyper meta, like Rise isn't meta, he can still play them to a good enough extent where he looks really, really solid on them, and he helps his team out a lot because of just how well he plays on it. I always will tell you to go comfort over meta, unless in the meta it's really bad. Like Lee Sin, I think is an example of a pick that right now I just simply wouldn't do comfort over meta, because even if you're really good at that champion, you just don't have a lot of upside as a pick in general. So yeah, I think ThunderTalk in general looked pretty good here. Yukao's gonna get my player of the series. It was really, really solid, but honestly, big shout out to Xiaoshang, who comes in here back into the top lane for Hoya, who's been playing pretty much all year long ever since they acquired him. Xiaoshang comes back into the top lane here, and he plays a lot more aggressive picks. He brings out the Renekton, he brings out the Akali here, and definitely interesting, but it worked. It very much worked for him. He had a very good game here in Game 3 on the Gwen. I think he was a big reason why TT was actually able to win that final game. And overall, I thought he played pretty well, and I would expect to continue to see him in the lineup if he is going to play like this over the course of the back half of the season, because Hoya, as good of a weak side player as he was, he just wasn't offering you much in terms of actual carry potential. Like, he was fine as a top laner, but he wasn't really going to push your team over the top. If Xiaoshang can actually win games for you here on some better picks, then I'm all for that. Obviously, you can get your weak side elsewhere. Kepler and Yao Yao, I think, are more than adept at playing that here, as they did on the Aphelios, and then assorted accoutrement throughout the rest of the series. But, yeah, ThunderTalk looked pretty good here off the back of UCal and Xiaoshang just being pretty solid. As for LGD, like I said, they won Game 1 off the back of Fearness's Fiora, and then they just kind of collapsed in the last 2 games, as they've kind of done all year long. I said I think Shadow and Yeji are the better duo, and they played all right here. They definitely weren't the weak points of LGD. I actually thought Yeji played pretty okay here. He tried to match him on the Rise, tried to match UCal on the Rise, and unfortunately, he's just not UCal on that pick. And then in Game 3, he goes to Talia to try and, beat up on the Silas a little bit, but it just doesn't work out. He doesn't get the roams off, and it's just, he's not able to get his team ahead. Shadow, unfortunately, is the one who ends up with all the gold, and as I've talked about multiple times on this channel, if Lee Sin is the one on your team that ends up with the gold, you pretty much have a 0% chance of winning that game. So that's just how it goes, unfortunately. The dud of the series for me is going to go to Jin Zhao here in the bottom lane, or in the support position. He was really, really not good here in Games 2 and 3. Obviously, Game 2 on the Braum, if your team is losing, you're going to look bad. But Game 3, I thought, was just a really uninspired performance on the Tahm Kench. You have a lot of agency in that lane here as Tahm Kench with Ascena. You have a lot of agency not only to attack something like an Aphelios Leona, where Aphelios is actually super vulnerable if the Leona is going in, but you also have, a lot of opportunity to roam in a matchup like this, because the Aphelios really isn't going to be able to punish you super duper heavily for it, with the Senna, who's just going to be able to play really safe and basically be out of Leona's range 24/7. So you want to see more out of Jin Zhao here on the Tahm Kench, and you just didn't see it. So he has a not-so-good series here. He's going to get my dud of the series, but everybody else was relatively okay on LGD, just not great. Outlook-wise for these two teams, LGD is bad. They're one of those bottom teams that I was talking about. Put them in with Rare Adam, put them in with WE, put them in with Ultra Prime. They're all kind of in that bottom 4, and it's pretty clear to see. ThunderTalk is 6 and 7 now, and I think a lot of people will be surprised to say that they're pretty actively fighting for a playoff spot. I'm not sure if they have one at the given moment, but they're on a pretty nice win streak right now, and some of those wins are against teams that are relatively good. I'm thinking about the OMG win, I'm thinking about the FPX win, and so it's definitely interesting. This ThunderTalk Gaming team might actually be putting themselves in a pretty decent position to make playoffs. I'm not going to say that it's 100% in that boat, because again, they're still under 500, but at the end of the day, if you can continue to win going into the back half of the season here, teams are going to be dropping games. LNG is probably going to be dropping games, right? A team like Anyone's Legend is really struggling right now. You could really put yourself in a pretty good position if you win out here. So definitely something to keep track of. I really like how this team has started to play in the past few weeks, and they've set themselves up pretty nicely to control their own destiny, as long as the rest of the teams kind of follow the pattern that we expect from them. Moving on to the second series here of Day 3 action, and we had a top-of-the-table clasher, one that I think a lot of people were really interested to see the outcome of. We had Weibo Gaming taking on JD Gaming, and JDG with the 2-0. They continue to prove that they are in that top 4 for a reason, and even in their losses, like last week against RNG, they looked like a pretty good team and arguably the better team in that series. They obliterate Weibo in this one. It really was never all that close. I'll get into where some of the plays were interesting here, but it really was never all that close. Mostly because of the gap here in the mid lane. Holy crap, Yagao had a really, really dominant series here. And I've been hyping up Yagao all split long. I think he's having, like I've said a bunch of times on this channel, the best split of his career. And he absolutely continued that here. He was phenomenal on the Ahri in Game 1 here, just kind of being proactive on the map and helping Kanavi do so much with that Xin Zhao pick. And then in Game 2, he was really the one who took over. That Sylas pick was doing so much damage towards the back half of that fight. He could not die, even no matter how hard he tried. He was not going to be able to die. He had so much healing and protection on that team, and he was doing so much damage so quickly that he was basically unstoppable. Yagao is a very deserving player of the series for me, for JDG, and I really, really hope that Yagao can keep this up, because we've seen something similar from him before in terms of him playing well in the regular season and just not being that carry force when it comes to playoff time. He kind of takes a more passive role. I'm really, really hoping he can keep this up, because he's a big reason of why this JDG team has really been in that top 4, right? We know Kanavi's good. We know 369 is good. Hope and Missing, we know can be a really solid bot lane, but Yagao has really stepped up and been one of the top 3-ish mid laners in the region this year, right? Like, it's a really tough conversation, but he absolutely deserves to be in that conversation. I also want to give big credit to Kanavi, who continues to, in my opinion, be the best jungler in the LPL. He was really, really solid on that Xin Zhao in Game 1, was basically just killing every lane for sport at that point. And obviously SOFM as well on the Pantheon. But yeah, I mean, Kanavi had a really good Game 1, and he was everywhere in Game 2 as well. On the Wukong, just really being able to make an impact with Yagao across the map. Those two have great synergy. 369 continues to be good. Hope and Missing continue to be good. JDG is just a good team. Overall, there's really no other way to put it. For Weibo, you're going to be really, really upset about this loss. It's definitely frustrating because, you know, this is a team that I think is really fighting for its top 4 life right now, and they just seem to be right on the outside of it, and this game really proves that. They just are a little bit too coin flippy for me, right? Because you have really good players that can perform on this team. I think Huanfeng actually played the series relatively okay. It was just the rest of the team that kind of let him down, most notably Angel here in the mid lane, who, you know, no surprise to anybody who's watched this channel for any extended period of time. I really haven't talked about Angel a ton this season, and that should tell you all you need to know, but anybody who's watched my channel for an extended period of time, watched my last 2 years worth of player rankings and reviews, knows that I am very much not an Angel fan. I'm not high on Angel. I think he definitely isn't the mid laner that you would want as a team that wants to try and make worlds. And I think this was a great example of why. When he loses very hard. He was reportable here in Game 1 and Game 2. He was awful on the Taliyah. It's a pick that we've seen him on throughout the year, and he's not been this awful on it, but man, did he have an abhorrent series here. He's easily my dud of the series. His scoreline does not do justice how badly he actually played here. And that really is something to keep in mind. It was very, very frustrating to watch. Another player who I think their scoreline doesn't do them justice, but maybe in the opposite way here, is going to be On in support. I thought he was probably the most proactive player here on Weibo Gaming. You could say what you want about the Ashe support pick. We've seen it do wonders of work in other games here. Unfortunately, he just wasn't able to get ahead, but it's always fun to watch On play the game of League of Legends because he is never going to not try to win the game. And I think that that is a huge benefit. I think a team of him and the Shy is very fun to watch, generally speaking, and, you know, I think we're lucky to have this Weibo Gaming team. A lot of people are mad about SOFM's build on Viego in Game 2, rightfully so. I don't exactly know what he was going for, but it certainly is funny. Overall, I just think Weibo is, you know, one of those teams where sometimes you just get series like this where they're just going to get outskilled and they're not going to have the consistency to be able to pull themselves back and be able to come back later in the game. So that's kind of what happened. Outlook-wise, Weibo's going to be on the outside looking in of those top 4 teams at the moment. Obviously, this is a team I think a lot of people want to go to Worlds. I just am really not convinced that they have the talent, quite frankly, to go to Worlds. The top 4 in this region are going to be very, very, very tough to beat. And honestly, like, while they are probably the best team outside of that top 4, I do think there is a pretty big gap from, say, like, Victory 5 and JD Gaming to Weibo Gaming. And that's not to say that it's impossible for them to get there if they go on a pretty miracle playoff run. I'm not going to be too surprised because the highs of this team are high, but also the lows of this team are very low, and they could very well get knocked out way, way before they are expected to in the playoffs in that same vein. But for JDG, I still think they continue to be underrated as a team. Obviously they lost to RNG in 3 games last week, but yeah, like I said in last week's video, I really think you could have made a case that they were the better team in that series. They just lost due to some weird macro plays at the end there. I think they're a very, 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 very good team, and a team I really, really hope can continue the success. They've kind of been known for choking, not only in the playoffs, but on the world stage. If they can kind of show up and perform at this level, I think throughout the rest of the year, I'd be really, really excited to call JDG one of the best teams in the world like they are kind of playing right now. Moving on to day 4 action here in week 9 of the LPL. And we started off day 4 with certainly a series. It was 2-0. Not the cleanest 2-0, but a 2-0 here. Team WE taking on LGD Gaming, and EDG picks up the 2-0, although, man, against WE, you would have hoped they would have done it a little bit cleaner. WE still looking for their first win of the season. That has yet to come, but EDG, they're fine, I guess. Like, I've been hyping this team up in recent weeks. I think that they are good, and they're getting better, and I think Junjia has made them better, but this series was very meh. Scout played great. Scout played great here on the Galio, and then he played great on the LeBlanc. 2 picks that we just don't see in the meta right now. Sure, if you think you're good at these picks, play them. Galio's really good into Ryze, and so I totally get that matchup, and LeBlanc can take over a game. She just doesn't do it nearly as easily as she used to right now. So yeah, sure, like, if you think these picks are good, play him, and he played him really well. He's my player of the series for a reason. He was really, really solid in this one, and was probably the reason that EDG won this series, at least convincingly, but maybe even at all, right? He was really, really good. Flandre also played pretty well in this one. He's been okay. He's been a lot better, I'll say, in the past few weeks. He was really not good towards the beginning half of this year. He had some series where it was like, oh my god, like, what is he doing? But really dominant game of Yone here from Flandre in game 2 to really, really put him back in the conversation of like, okay, like, he's starting to kind of find his groove again, and I like to see that. Certainly not an all-A situation here for Flandre. And then the bot lane, you have Viper and Mako here, and scoreline, I think they look pretty good overall, but they, quite frankly, got outplayed by Jing and Kadaya in this series. And I'm not really what to say about that. Viper has easily, without a doubt, been the best player on EDG this year. I don't think that is even remotely up for debate. Viper has been the player that has kept EDG in the season while they were going through all of this ridiculous struggle period. But, you know, I'm willing to call out when he had a bad series, and this was a bad series. Him and Mako just got outplayed by Jing and Kadaya. There's really no other way to put it. Viper's Draven game was not good, and his Sivir game wasn't much better. Overall, just not a great series at all from Viper. And Mako was okay, but again, not great. I thought that bot lane 2v2 was actually in favor of WE, which is certainly not something in a million years I would have thought I was going to say, but Jing has certainly gotten better week by week. Junjia plays game 1 here. He plays the Pantheon. He helps out Scout quite a bit, and they win the game. Game 2, they go to JJ, and it's a lot more interesting. Certainly a lot less clean. I don't know why you don't just stick with Junjia at this point. He very much looks like the better player for this team. I'm not going to say he's the better player overall, but JJ requires so much attention from his mid laner to be playing around him and to be playing with him, and I just don't think Scout wants to do that right now. It's not the playstyle that I think Scout really has capitalized on himself playing with, and I think Junjia is a much more supportive style, like, I'm going to farm up and I'm going to help out the team kind of jungler. At least that's how he's played for EDG. I would say Junjia looks like the better jungler for EDG, and I would expect to see him for most of the year. I've been saying that for a few weeks now, but yeah, very, very interesting that they put JJ back in, and quite frankly, they did struggle with him in a lot more than they did with Junjia, so something to keep in mind there. But for WE, honestly, big shout out to the bot lane here. Like I said, they kind of outplayed Viper and Mako, and they put themselves in a good position to actually play this late game. Unfortunately, they just weren't talented enough to be able to pull it off at the end. I think Shanks continues to be kind of an underrated player here because he's stuck on WE. He's a good player, and I think if he were paired up with a better team, we would be seeing that a lot more consistently. Obviously, he showed last year, last summer on a good WE team that he could be a top 6 to 8 mid laner in the region, which is pretty solid. He just certainly hasn't been that this year, and I don't think through a fault of his own, mostly just the fault of the rest of the team around him. This top side is miserable for WE. Whether it's Biu, whether it's Demon, whether it's Beishong, whether it's View, those two positions have been an absolute black hole for WE so far this year. Demon was awful. I really wanted to give him the dud of the series, but at the very least, like, you could commit to me that he was at least doing his job when he was dying a lot late game. But View, I just don't think there's really any sort of argument that he wasn't good, that he was bad. Like, that he wasn't bad, I should say, in this series, because he got out-jungled not only by Junjia, but by JJ. In both games, he was not very good here. He got completely beaten on the Wukong in Game 1. And then he was just a non-factor on the Viego in Game 2. So View is going to get my dud of the series here. Beishong continues to sit on the bench and probably say, like, man, if this guy's playing over me, I don't know what is going on, because View has not been good. Demon has arguably been the worst top laner in the LPL since he's played. He has yet to win a game, like a laning phase, against anybody in the league, which is not promising. At least Biu could at least win lane sometimes. Like, Demon has just been a huge negative for WE. This top side of the map has been genuinely disastrous, and even when the bot side plays as well as they do in this series, it generally felt unwinnable for them because of how those two were playing. So, outlook-wise, what do I need to say about WE? They're 0-13. They're 0-13. They're awful. They're the worst team in the league. Nothing else to say. Even if they have good players, they're bad. EDG continues to kind of grow here. Like, their record looks good. They're at 10-5. They certainly haven't played like that record all year long. That is for certain. And in this series, I think they're going to be happy to have picked up a 2-0 win. You know, if they weren't playing WE, I think it might have been much more dicey. But at the end of the day, a 2-0 win is a 2-0 win. And they continue their win streak here. They've been on a much better page over the past few weeks. All I'm saying is I hope that they can continue that moving forward, because a strong EDG team, I think, is good for the league just in general, but this wasn't necessarily a showing to me that they are all the way back to where they need to be yet. Moving on to our second series here of day 4, and our second series here was a matchup between Rare Adam and LGD Esports. And Rare Adam, surprising a lot of people, is actually able to pick up the win here. I was just talking about how it really felt like they were doomed for the rest of this year, but here we are. Here we are, not doomed, but actually beating a quote-unquote playoff team right now in LNG. Whew, like, this is interesting. But we'll get to RA first, because I like talking about the winners. First, they actually played pretty well here. This bot lane is, like, way better with Zora. What have they been doing this past, like, couple months? I get Yuyanja's, like, a better name, right? But, like, Yuyanja and iBoy have been generally awful for Rare Adam over the course of Summer Split. Like, maybe one of the worst bot lanes and some of the heaviest people to carry in the LPL so far this year. iBoy now with Zora in is like a completely different player, and Zora himself has actually been really good. Let's forget about the game 2. The Nami game didn't happen. That Ashe game in game 1 was actually nuts. Like, he was so good on Ashe in game 1 on that support. This is the Ashe support that I think can really work out, right? Ashe Kalista is a really dangerous bot lane to play into because of the amount of actual pressure that they have to kill at any moment, because Ashe can just continuously slow you, and Kalista can just sit there and fire away and dodge everything you need to throw at her, because she has that ability, and just, you know, do a lot of good stuff. And then you play Xayah Rakan in game 2 or game 3, and that Rakan was schnasty. Like, that was a really fun game of Rakan to watch from Zora. He very much deserves my player of the series here. He was really good for Rare Adam, and I very much would expect to see him for the rest of the year at this point. I really don't see any reason to play Yuyanja again if Zora and iBoy are going to be playing like this. But big shout out to Leon. He continues to be both the best and worst thing that happens to this team. He had a really good game on Pantheon, and then a decent game on Nidalee. You know, his signature Nidalee in game 3. He gets it, they win. I get it, you want to attribute it to him, but he wasn't all that great in game 3. Just kind of okay. And then Cube, I actually thought played really well this series, but we'll get into the top lane matchup. Actually now, because we'll switch over to LNG. This is what I want to say about Panda C. Obviously, he's not ready and he's not good enough for the LPL. There's no other way to put it. Like, I don't want to sit here and pretend like, oh, Panda C isn't, you know, the worst player on this team, because he's not good. Like, he's the worst player on this team, and as long as they start him, they're going to have a much tougher time winning. But, like, you hear the stories and you see the emotion on this kid's face of, like, he went to get dinner after one of their games, and the cashier was like, Fantasy, you let us down today. Like, the amount of stress, and you see him crying after the loss here today. It's just like, the amount of stress that he must be under from an organization that had Worlds expectations. He comes in not as an LDL player, but as the sub to an LDL team to try and play, you know, for a playoff team in the LPL. It's just a recipe for disaster, and he's not ready to do this. And it really feels like it's absolutely killed his mental, and now he's playing even worse than he would have played had, even just his skill level. Like, his mental seems completely boomed. So, yes, he is my dud of the series here, but man, I just feel sorry for the kid because he really doesn't deserve all the hate that he's getting for being put in a position where, quite frankly, he just wasn't ready. Like, it wasn't his fault that they just decided to not play All A and play Fantasy instead. So, feel bad for him on that respect. Nobody else on this team played particularly well. I thought Doanby had a good game too here on the Renekton, but outside of that, like, nobody else was really good here. Like, Light was okay. Like, he certainly had some moments where he was good, especially in Game 3 here on the Lucian, but overall, I don't think he really had, like, a gigantic impact, and Light, like I've said over the past few weeks, has been consistently the guy for LNG that has kept them alive all season long, so, you know, not really too surprising there. Tarzan and Doanby continue to have no synergy, and both of them continue to struggle because of it. I don't think either of them look like they as good as they actually are here, and that's frustrating to see. Lumao, you know, when you play Engaged Champions, you're going to look bad, and when you play Nami into a fed Zyra Khan, you're going to look bad as well, so it just is what it is, right? Like, LNG's not very good. Outlook-wise, this is a team that I think very much wants to make playoffs. I really don't know if they will. It's going to be very dicey towards the end of the year. I think Ale needs to come back in for this team to really have any shot at winning here, and I just don't know if they're going to do that with Ale expressing so many regrets about re-signing a contract with LNG and obviously the beef that he has with the coach and everything like that. So I don't really know what's going on here, but with Fantasy in here, I just don't have a ton of expectations that this team is actively going to win many games the rest of this split. As for Rare Atom, it's a good win here. It's not like it really matters in the long run. This team is so far out of playoff contention at this point that a win doesn't really do anything for them, but they're going to be happy to get it in the long run. There's really no benefit to tanking in the LPL, so they're going to be happy to get that win. Zora looks a lot better than Yanja does, and I imagine they're going to be rocking with this 5 for probably the rest of the split. Moving on to Day 5 of LPL action this week. Day 5 was kicked off with the series between LGD Gaming and Top Esports. Top continues to roll. They continue to rock and roll and really not look like they have any sort of weaknesses at all. LGD goes back to their bad roster, and they get obliterated for it. So, yeah, there's not really much to talk about with this series, but I'll try to do my best. For TES, everybody on this team looked dominant in this series. Let's talk about Tian, who's going to get my player of the series here. Talk about controlling the map and affecting every lane. Not only did every lane win by themselves, but Tian created advantages for every single lane very consistently over and over and over again. He continues to be awesome. There's really no other way to put it. No pun intended, because they're playing against LGD. But Tian continues to look great, like genuinely phenomenal. One of the best junglers in the world right now. Him and Knight have genuinely perfect synergy, which is insane to see, and he kind of feels like he has that with the rest of the team as well. So just generally, Tian has been perfect here for Top Esports, and he very much deserves my player of the series here. Knight played great, not really the carry Knight that we've been seeing, but not that it really matters. Wayward was unbelievably good in Game 1 here on the Sejuani. Talk about someone just like setting up everything for the team. I was very close to giving Wayward player of the series, but his Game 2 was just a little bit weaker. I thought he got robbed for Game 1 player of the game. He was genuinely fantastic for Top Esports here on Sedge. Just because he's on Sedge and it's not super flashy doesn't mean he wasn't great. And Wayward continues to be the large front runner for Rookie of the Year, as he has been pretty fantastic for Top Esports. Then you have Jackie Love and Mark, and I've talked about it on this channel, but both of them make each other better. They're both playing the best League of Legends of their entire career, I think you could maybe say. Jackie Love, that's a little bit up for debate, but he's definitely playing the most consistent League of Legends he's ever played in his entire career, mostly because him and Mark both are always on the same page in terms of when to go in and when to play aggressive, and it really works for them. Jackie Love was awesome in the series, so was Mark. Honestly, everybody on TES was really, really good. I feel like I'd be wasting time just talking about how good they are the entirety of this recap, but let's talk about LGD. They got obliterated. Like, this was never close. There was no point in either of these two games where it ever felt like LGD could win. So, yeah, there's that. We know they're a bad team. They're going up against the best team in the league. yeah, it is what it is, right? Like, Kui, Haichao, and Awesome were back in here. I think all three of them are worse than their counterparts. And not that it would have really mattered in this series, but they got completely obliterated. Good guy Haichao, though, did give Jackie Love his penta in base, and so we gotta love him for that. Fearness is gonna get my dud of the series here. When you go 0-7-0 across 2 games, you deserve dud of the series. He did not contribute in a single positive kill for his team all series long. That is as bad as it gets on 2 games of Gnar. He was completely obliterated by Wayward in game 1. It was not even close. And then game 2, he still lost pretty hard, but it just wasn't nearly as much of a, like, oh my god, like, it's not even close level of winning from Wayward. But still, overall, Fearness played bad. Kui is not a good jungler. He's the worst jungler in the LPL when he is playing. He has genuinely been awful for LGD. Haichao and Awesome have had moments of good play, but overall, I think they've generally not been good, and they generally lose lane here for LGD. I know, obviously, going up against top, it's not the best example, and then Jin Jiao is just not a good player. So, yeah, I mean, outlook-wise, LGD is one of the bottom 2 teams in the league. There's really no other way to say it. They're awful. They continue to be bad. I mean, them, WE, and Ultra Prime, like, are all kind of in that, I mean, even Rare Atom, right, are all kind of in that cluster of just, like, bleh. Like, they suck so bad. So, yeah, LGD continues to look bad, especially when they put their bad players in. Top Esports, in my opinion, is the best team in the LPL right now, and I know a lot of people are really expecting them to fall off once we get, you know, back to in-person games here, but I just don't see that coming. I think this team has synergized in a way that is different than any of these players in the past. You always talk about this Top Esports team choking. You talk about players like Jackie Love and Knight and Tion choking when it matters most. I think that this team is built different. Tion and Knight have a chemistry that, quite frankly, I don't think either of them have ever had before. And Jackie Love and Mark, I think, have a chemistry that I don't think either of them have had before. So I'm very excited to see what this Top Esports team can do. They remind me so much of what Gen G is doing over in the LCK right now, of just, God, they can win from any lane, and I really feel confident that no matter what the enemy team does, they're always going to be at some level of an advantage because of the talent level that they have. So definitely interesting. Hopefully they can maintain it. I would love to see this team, you know, win the LPL. I think that would be awesome for everybody involved, and I definitely think it's possible with how they're playing right now. Moving on to our second series here of Day 5 action. And we had a fun one here between Bilibili Gaming and OMG. BLG picking up the 2-0 series win in a little bit of an upset here. I think OMG had really started to gain a lot of momentum in the past few weeks. And BLG is back, baby. They are really feeling it. Like I said, this team has really gotten a lot better in the last few weeks than they were in the first few weeks. And I'm not really sure who to credit that with. There was a lot of good, a lot of bad that BLG was doing, but they really couldn't figure out a roster, a complete lineup of 5 that I think they really wanted to play. Once they locked that in, once they really said, like, okay, we're going to play Weiwei, we're going to play Doggo, we're going to play Icon, they really started to get a lot better. And Icon especially has been a huge improvement, I think, to this team. Maybe not all the time, but certainly in this series. He's easily going to be my player of the series here. He was genuinely fantastic for BLG. Game 1 on Azir, he was really taking over the late game here, and really a big reason why they were able to win a lot of those team fights. And then Game 2 on the LeBlanc was just killing everybody. He goes up into Cream's Akali, a very difficult matchup to actually play for the LeBlanc, because I think the Akali just has more pressure across the map for the most part. But he was better. He was just a straight-up better player here. Even if Cream did play relatively okay and relatively well in the series, I think Icon just outplayed him here, and very much deserves the player of the series. He was looking very good. Again, going to a couple picks that I think aren't considered like the most meta picks in the world right now in the mid lane, but Icon's very good at them, so he knows he can play them at a high level, and he did that, and he basically won BLG this series. He wasn't the only one on the team to actively play well, though. I don't want to try and take a, just take a win and say it's all Icon and the rest of this team is playing bad. Crisp is still really good at the game of League of Legends. Yes, 2 games of Yuumi, boo, but, Yuumi can still be played in a relatively high level, and Crisp is just really good. He's been really consistent for BLG. Even when this team has really struggled, Crisp has always been the member that I think has kind of been on the ball and was pretty good in this one as well. Bin, when he's on is good, and, when he's playing well is good, and he played alright in this one, especially that Gnar in Game 2 was a lot better. Weiwei controlled the map overall. Doggo's still inconsistent. Definitely not sold on Doggo as being a starting LPL AD carry, but he's here, and he's fine. Overall, I think this is a good win for BLG. They're going to be happy with it. For OMG, They're going to be frustrated with this loss because this is a game that they really wanted to go into with a win, I imagine. After a phenomenal week last week, really raising the expectations for this team, they do what they've done all season, and they crash back down to earth in the week after. And it's really unfortunate. They go to 7-8 here. They drop below 500. Shanji's going to get my dud of the series here. He just didn't contribute a lot in this series. The Sejuani game in Game 1 was meh, and then the Gwen game in Game 2 was maybe worse. So, yeah, just not a great series from Shanji. It really feels like when he's not on a pick that he can really, like, dominate on. He can sometimes struggle. He is a good tank player, and obviously his signature pick is a tank, but overall, I just don't know if I would consider Shanji to be, like, the most flexible player in the world. Like I said, I thought Cream actually played pretty well in this series. Unfortunately, Icon just played better. And so, you know, he gets the Mage matchup in Game 1. Icon wins that. He gets the Assassin matchup in Game 2. Icon wins that. Icon was just the better mid, and it's not necessarily Cream's fault, but it is something to keep in mind. Abel had a lot of good plays, and he also had a lot of bad plays in this series. Sometimes jumping in on Tristana is not the play, and he was caught out a couple times in this series for just making some weird ones. Overall, I think OMG, like, outlook-wise, they are right in the mix here. BLG, FPX, Anyone's Legend, LNG, like all ThunderTalk, like all of these teams are in the mix for the last like 3 playoff spots, and it's going to be incredibly interesting to see what exactly happens to 6, 7, and 8 in the playoffs, because there are basically 7 through 10 is all up in the air. So it's going to be really, 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 really intriguing to see what happens. OMG's not going to be happy with a loss here. They really could have secured a better position for themselves with a win, but, you know, it's not the end of the season for them or anything like that. BLG is going to be very happy. They're in a very, very tough position. I think maybe the toughest outside of any team that I think has a chance of making playoffs. And so technically it's possible for them, but they're really going to have to win out, and they're going to have to get some luck from other teams in order to get in there. Obviously, this is a good start, but I still wouldn't hedge my bets on a team like BLG being able to make playoffs just because so many things would have to go right for them throughout the rest of the next week. That's going to bring us to Day 6 here in the LPL, and Day 6 was kicked off with a classic matchup here between RNG and Invictus Gaming. And RNG was able to pick up the 2-1 win, even if it wasn't as clean as they wanted it to be. Game 1 was a bloodbath, just a complete and utter fiesta in the most fun way possible. Obviously, probably the most fun game of the week to watch, without a lot of question. Really just a bloodbath. I mean, it was 30-25. Like, what else do you need me to tell you? It was really, really great to watch. Breathe played really well towards the back half of that game on the Gwen. Even if he was dying just a tad too much in the beginning, he was doing a really good job on that back half, really creating a lot of opportunities for his team. But it's not like Invictus played bad there. Like, I thought Mole had a pretty decent game here on the Vex. June had a pretty decent game here on the Xin Zhao. But outside of that, you know, right? Like, meh. Then you've got Game 2, where Invictus just kind of beats them. Like, they just win these team fights over and over again. June does a really good job on the Xin Zhao in this game. He's pretty clearly the most active player on the map here. Zika dominates in a side lane here on the Jax. When that pick works, it can really work. And then Galio had a decent game here. Not a great one, but a decent game here. Mole, I should say, on the Galio. And then RNG, just probably the biggest blowout of a Game 3 I have ever watched in the LPL. Just a complete and utter massacre of an Invictus Gaming team that just was not ready to face the full wrath of RNG. And, wow, it was dominant. My player of the series here is actually up for debate. You could give it to Breathe, like I said, for the Game 1. Gala gets his Penta in Game 3. You know, Gala and Pentas on Zeri. It just happens. Like, how do you give him Zeri at this point? How do you give anybody Zeri at this point? Nerf that champion into the ground, please. But I settled on Wei here. I think Wei was probably the most impactful player. I mean, for Christ's sake, he had 59 kill participation. Like, he participated in 59 kills. He had 12 kills and 47 assists over 3 games. Absolutely absurd. So he's going to get my player of the series here. He was really, really good here on Vi across 3 games here. Maybe not always dominating June, but always creating an impact on the map, even if he wasn't the most important player in every single game, right? He was probably the one that I think without him, they struggle a lot more. Without a jungler that I think was able to take over in that same way that Wei was towards the back half of these games. He was really, really important for RNG. But, of course, like I said, Breathe was phenomenal here on the Gwen in Game 1. And on the Gragas in Game 3, I should say. And then Gala in Game 3 on that Zeri was genuinely disgusting to watch. Really, really, really terrifying to deal with, I imagine. Not the most fun in the world to deal with. So definitely something to keep in mind there. But moving on to IG, they kept themselves in the series relatively well against the top 4 team. They're going to be happy about that, although obviously all they did was piss them off for Game 3, so there is that. But, you know, credit to June, who continues to be elo stuck here on this Invictus Gaming team. He's much better than, like, a bottom 5 team in the LPL, you know, deserves, and he shows that pretty much every week, and he did this week again. Not only was he really important in their series win earlier this week, but he was really important in their game win against RNG here, as he played really well on that Xin Zhao. And then, I think the dud of the series is kind of a toss-up here. I think you could give it to On, who was just kind of not all that good positioning-wise on the Aphelios throughout the series. He was doing a lot of damage, but he was often putting himself in positions to die to do that, and he would get caught out relatively frequently, and his laning phase wasn't particularly great, although you are Nagala and Ming, so there is that. And then, who I actually am going to give it to, which is Mole. I thought Mole actually had a pretty decent Game 1. I wasn't a huge fan of his Game 3, though. I thought his Game 3 was easily the worst of anybody on that team, maybe with the exception of Zika here on the Jax, but Mole just wasn't actively doing all that much for the team here in Game 3 on the Lissandra. Was pretty much just completely outroamed here by Xiaohu, and he had absolutely no impact. So Mole is going to get my dud of the series here. That's a player of the series and a dud of the series this week for Mole. But overall, outlook-wise, Invictus Gaming is certainly better than the bottom few teams because they would not be able to take a game off of RNG, even if RNG was doing just a little bit of trolling. But good for IG to take a game here. They're going to be happy about that. They're not in playoff contention. They've officially been eliminated from playoffs, I believe, with this loss. But, you know, they never thought they were going to be in that conversation anyways. I think there are a lot of positives to this IG team that you can take away from this year. And, you know, I think the series might even be a little bit of one of them. June and Mole have definitely been a good duo, and you really have to decide if you want to keep them for next year. But for RNG, they're going to be happy to pull away with this win. Obviously, they're the better team by a considerable margin. They're still in the top 4, you know, the top 2, arguably here, and I still think I like a lot of their chances going into playoffs. It's certainly going to be interesting. I think a lot of these players have, you know, they play really well together. Breathe, I think, has really acclimated himself into this team really well at this point. He struggled a little bit towards the beginning half of the split, but he's gotten to the point where I really feel like he's become a part of this RNG team. And I think overall, they're just a really, really good roster. There's not really a lot to say. They continue to be very good, just like they were last split. And this team should really have not a lot of problems working their way through playoffs and being able to make Worlds. Moving on to our second series here of Day 6 action, and we had a fun one here between FunPlus Phoenix and Weibo Gaming. Weibo picking up the 2-0 series win. We've had a lot of 2-0s this week, not a lot of 3-game sets, but definitely getting a little bit of a clearer picture as to the playoff run right now, or the playoff, like, I don't know, landscape, atmosphere? What word would I use for this? I don't know. Weibo getting the win here is good. That gets them the double-digit wins here on the season. Everybody on this team played really well, but I gotta give credit to the solo laners here. Not only did Angel bounce back incredibly well from what was arguably his worst series of the year earlier in the week here, but man, they camped the Shy harder than I have seen anybody camp a top laner in a very long time. I'm talking multiple 5-man plays top lane, whether they got something or not. Like, very, very interesting. And even then, the Shy was up 2 levels, 40, CS. Like, it was really, really disgusting to watch. The Shy played really, really well on Fiora in this series, but Angel was really the carry. He was really the one who was, like, pushing the team forward, not only in Game 1 on the Sylas, but in Game 2 on the Azir as well. Overall, just a really good series here from Weibo Gaming's solo laners, and a really, really, really important bounce back from Angel here after what was a truly abysmal series earlier in the week. Not to say everybody else on the team played bad. Huanfeng didn't die throughout the entire series. We got 2 games of Pyke from On, kind of his signature pick here. We got to see him pull it out twice. Even if he wasn't, like, ridiculously successful on it, he was still pretty impactful and fun to watch on it, which is important. And then SOFM, 2 good games of Wukong, as we've kind of come to see from him. So overall, I think Weibo just looked pretty good in this series against a team that I think does have talent on it and isn't some sort of pushover team. As for FBX, blah, like, this team is really digging themselves a hole. They're sitting at 6-9, kind of out of the playoff picture right now. Obviously, they're only like a game or 2 behind anybody in the playoff picture. It is realistic that they could still make playoffs going into next week, but it is definitely something that is interesting to look at. It's definitely going to take a lot of, help from other teams in the similar way that it'll take, a team like OMG or BLG some help from other teams, I think, to make playoffs here. But Summit, not great in this series. Like I said, they put a lot of attention into the top lane. That meant Summit had so many resources, and yet he was still losing to the Shy, who, yes, it's the Shy. He's better than you. I get it, right? But Summit just did not have a good series overall. He's going to get my dud of the series here. He's gotten quite a few of those over the course of the season. I know a lot of people have talked about Summit coming to FPX and just being a straight upgrade here, and I think that there is some merit to that. I also think that he has definitely been more volatile than anybody that they've had in that position throughout the year. So definitely don't know how to feel about that right now, but Summit did not look good in the series. Neither did Care, who just got outplayed by Angel pretty much from moment one. They were the two that I think were really starting to drive this team, and they did not show up. LWX and Hang have really taken a step back here in summer. I was really high on them in spring. They were kind of carrying this FPX team throughout most of the spring split into a relatively decent record, but they really have not been the carry threats that they were at all in summer, and that's been in spring. That's definitely been disappointing to see. I'm very high on both of these players, and I'm really hoping that they can kind of get their form back, but if they miss playoffs, that's really, really going to be unfortunate, I think, for both of them. But overall, outlook-wise, like I said, FPX is definitely going to need some help to get into a playoff spot. Only top 10 make playoffs, and obviously them, BLG, OMG, Anyone's Legend, they're all kind of in that same quadrant. It's really going to be up till next week to decide which of those two, I believe two of those teams are probably going to be making playoffs. ThunderTalk is also in that conversation. 3 of those teams are going to be making playoffs, and it's definitely going to be interesting. It's probably going to be up to next week to decide which one of those 3 teams make it. FPX basically has to win out from here, though, to even have a shot. So definitely something that they're going to have to do. As for Weibo Gaming, they put themselves in a pretty decent position to get 5th place in the split. They're going to be kind of right outside that top 4. I just don't think they're on that same level as that top 4, but they certainly have given themselves a chance to kind of shock the system and maybe cause an upset in playoffs. Obviously, with the talent level they have on this team, I think they can win pretty much any best of 5 that they put themselves in. I just don't know if I would favor them to beat any of those top 4 teams, but they certainly have the talent. If the Shy is playing like this, if you get a really good series out of this bot lane, I'm pretty sure that they could beat anybody in the world, and that is as true now as it will be in a month. So we'll definitely keep an eye out for that. Weibo is definitely fun to watch. That's going to bring us to our 7th and final day here of Week 9 LPL action, and we kicked off Day 7 with a matchup here between Ultra Prime and Victory 5. V5 is going to be able to pick up the 2-1 win here, although it's certainly not the cleanest series that they've ever had, and they continue to show definitely some problems moving into playoffs. Definitely not the sign you want to see as a team that I think already showed that they maybe don't perform in playoffs as expected. But they do win it, and they do come away with the win, mostly due to the fact that Rookie is just too good. He is just simply better than almost anybody else in this league and anybody else in the world. It would be a real shame if this team were to collapse and somehow Rookie were to miss Worlds, but he is doing absolutely everything in his power to make sure that doesn't happen. His game 1 here on Taliyah was really good, but this was really about his Ahri game in game 3, where it's like, oh my god, this was the best Ahri performance I may have seen all year long. Ahri's one of those picks that I think is pretty hit or miss, but I mean, Rookie really dominated this game on her and looked just genuinely great. He's easily the player of the series here, the second time this week that he's gotten that. He is carrying V5 across the finish line. Whether, the rest of the team wants to go with him is certainly up for debate, but he is most certainly carrying V5 across the finish line, and it's looking interesting. It's certainly looking like something. Zhao Bao is in the jungle now. Now, I have to say this, I'm not going to report on any sort of rumors or speculation or anything like that, but it does not look like we will be seeing Karsa for the rest of the year. That includes playoffs, presumably. Zhao Bao is now set to scrim only exclusively with the main team, and so it looks like we're going to be seeing Zhao Bao for the rest of the year here as the starting V5 jungler. Whether that is, whatever reason, I'm going to say that is definitely at least a little bit of a downgrade, but I do think Zhao Bao gets a little bit of a bad rap in terms of his overall perception. He's not Karsa, but he's also, I still think, a top 6-ish jungler in the LPL. He's still a good jungler, maybe just not that elite level jungler that Karsa has been throughout the past few years, but it looks like we're going to be getting Zhao Bao for the rest of the year for this Victory 5 team. He played alright in the series. He had some good games, he had some bad games. The game 2 was not so great, but, he was also relatively good in game 1 here and in game 3. Definitely out jungling Hacker, that's for sure. And then Photic and PB continue to be fine. Photic continues to raise the stock, I would say, a little bit. He still isn't in that, top tier of AD carries for me in the world, but he's probably in the tier right below it, right around where I would put someone like a Gumayushi. I think he's probably on that same kind of level. And that's a good thing. Like, that's a positive, I think, for Photic. Not to say that he's a bad player at all, just that, you know, he's definitely he's going to be helpful for this Victory 5 team. He's going to be a positive, I should say. And him and PP God definitely have good synergy, but PP God continues to play well. 3 games of Yuumi here. Kind of boring to watch, but at the end of the day, you know, Yuumi helps you win, so why not play it if you can get it? Moving over to Ultra Prime. This team has good moments for sure. Elk continues to show that he is way better than the team that he is on. Cryan, I think, is kind of in that boat as well, but mostly Elk. Obviously, he had such a great year last year. A really good spring. Definitely his head was not in the game come summer after they missed playoffs in spring, and he just has kind of been taking the split off, but he had a really good series here into Photic and PP God, which is a really tough matchup here. Him and Meow Meow have been relatively good, I think, overall as a duo. Definitely better than him and Xiaoxi were, I think. And, you know, Elk is just a really good player that I think hopefully still gets the recognition he deserves and maybe gets on a better team next year so that he can actually show what kind of a player he actually is. But unfortunately, there were some bad in this series, and that's mostly going to be the top side of the map, as it has been all year long for Ultra Prime. Hacker is going to get my dud of the series here. He was out-jungled pretty much all series long by Xiaolan Bao, and he was also creating a lot of problems for his team on that Xin Zhao, especially in that Game 3, where he was just kind of a nightmare trying to create plays in the top lane and just not getting anything. But Zoom is also at fault for that. Whether or not you want to blame Zoom for every single bad play here, he's on tank duty, he's on Ornn Sejuani duty all series long, and he's constantly calling for ganks, and then they come top and they die. They both die. Him and Hacker both die, and it's just putting his team in a really awful position. I really don't know if Zoom knows how to play weak side, and it's really starting to affect how Ultra Prime is actually able to play out the season. I think if they could index more into Elk, maybe this team would be better, but they put a lot of resources top lane into a player that has arguably been the worst top laner in the LPL, and they are not getting absolutely anything out of it. And so definitely not a good look there, and I imagine that will continue just because of the personalities on this team, but definitely not a good look overall. Outlook-wise, Ultra Prime is a bottom 4 team. I've talked about it all week. They're not good, even if they have the talent to be good. Elk and Cryan are better than this, but they're just not going to be better than this because the top side of this map is just too much of a negative. Hacker might be the worst jungle in the league. Zoom might be the worst top in the league. It's definitely not a good-looking top side, and they drag Ultra Prime down to that bottom 4 slot. As for Victory 5, they won, maybe not in the most convincing way possible, but they did win, and Rookie does look pretty much unbeatable here in the mid lane, as he has for most of the year. Photic and PP God are still a solid bot lane, and I think Xiaolan Bao is a little bit underrated. Rich is a little bit underrated. I definitely think this team is still in the top 4. I know a lot of people have been overreacting and maybe saying that Weibo is a better team than them. I certainly don't believe in that sentiment. I think if you asked me in a best of 5 who I think is more likely to win, I would say Victory 5. Although it's not a huge gap, I certainly think it is a gap there. Victory 5 is still a good team, and hopefully they can continue to hang on here and maybe get their form back a little bit moving into playoffs so that they don't accidentally miss Worlds and cost Rookie another World spot. That's going to bring us to our final series of the week here in our second series of Day 7, and that was, of course, JD Gaming taking on anyone's Legend. 2-0 win here for JDG as they continue to rock and roll to the finish line here of the LPL. They look good in this series, and they continue to look good in pretty much every series they're in. I actually think we're at the point where JDG is severely underrated by a majority of LPL fans. I don't think a lot of fans will see them as a top 2 to 3 team in the league, but they are, like, without a doubt, a top 3 team in the league, and I think very, very likely a top 2 team in the league, in my opinion. Their top side is unreal good. 369 and Kanavi might be the best in their roles in the league. And then Yagao has been phenomenal for this team. He's going to get my player of the series again in this series. He really is having the best split of his career. His Ari game in Game 2 was phenomenal. He has been awesome all year long for JDG. And I really, really hope that this year he actually gets the credit that he deserves in terms of how well he is actually playing. He's been the driving force towards the back half of the split for JDG. But big shout out to Hope and Missing as well, who played really, really well in this series. Obviously Missing with a game of Yuumi here. How good could it really be? But they, like, gapped Betty and Cho, and it was really, really strong. Hope was actually really, really solid in this series. Kind of, those 3 were the big hyper carries, and if you're sitting here and talking about 369 and Kanavi as the 2 players on the team that probably had the least impact on them winning the series, that is unbelievable, because both of them might be first team All-Pro this year. So genuinely phenomenal team here for JDG. Like, I really can't hype them up enough. I'm really, really excited to see how they're going to be in playoffs, because if there was ever a JD Gaming team that I think was going to make it and was really going to kill the JDG choking stereotype, this was going to be it. Like, this is going to be it. They're a phenomenal unit of players, and they're all in really good form right now, which is really good to say. The opposite is really true for anyone's legend right now, unfortunately. This is a team that started off super hot. I mean, they were sitting at, what, 7-3 a couple of weeks ago? They are now sitting at 7-7. That's 4 losses in a row for this team. And they have pretty much put themselves in a position where they now have to fight for their playoff life, when at times they were sitting at 3rd or 4th in the playoffs. Definitely not the ending of the season that you want, but their schedule has really, really tightened up, and they've just not been able to hang on and maintain through it. My dud of the series is going to go to Chocho here. I talk about this all the time. Amumu is the most feast or famine pick in League of Legends right now. A lot of times, Amumu can really do a lot of good work here for you. You can cause, like, CC chain over and over again, but man, when the Amumu doesn't work, like, it loses your team the game actively. And that's unfortunately what happened here in the game 1. He did not play much better in game 2 here on the Lulu into the Sivir Yuumi. So definitely not a great series from Chocho. He's going to get my dud of the series. But Betty continues to just kind of be meh. He's not really a game winner. He's not really a game loser. He doesn't actually offer that much to this Anyone's Legend team. He's kind of been carried along for the ride. When this team is doing well, that he wins. And when this team is not doing well, he loses. So that's kind of it there. And then Xiao Hao, I thought actually was the only player on this team that relatively did okay. Not a great game 1 here from Xiao Hao, but a much better game 2 on the Trundle. He was actually in a pretty good position here and was playing pretty well into Kanavi for most of game 2. Unfortunately, the rest of his team lost, most specifically Forge in the mid lane, and then, of course, the bottom lane as well. So there really wasn't much that this AL team could do at that point. Outlook-wise for these two teams, AL really's got to fight for its playoff life now. Like, they're really in the thick of it. There are a lot of teams that are going to be gunning for those last 3 or so playoff spots, and Anyone's Legend definitely is going to be one of them, but they are on a gigantic cold streak. Their players that were playing really well towards the beginning of the year have definitely started to take a little bit of a dip down. Most notably, Xiao Hao, who was phenomenal for most of this year, has really, really started to take a step back, even though he was pretty good in this series. And then Chocho, I thought, was really good towards the beginning half of the year, and he really has not been as good, nearly as good towards the back half. So definitely something to keep in mind. Anyone's Legend could definitely still make playoffs. And in fact, I believe they're still in it as of right now, but it's certainly not going to be a free ride there that they thought it might have been just a couple of weeks ago. But outlook-wise for JD Gaming, I mean, they're awesome. Like, they're, in my opinion, a top 2 team in the LPL. They look dominant. I think they have the upside to be LPL champions and one of the best teams in the world. If Yigao is playing like this, if you get the best top and jungle in the LPL, if Hope and Missing play like this team is practically unbeatable. Like, them and Top Esports are really going to start pushing, and RNG in that same conversation are all really going to start pushing each other for who the best team in China is. I don't know who that is right now. Obviously, I have my favorites, but it's definitely good to see a team like JDG continue to be this successful, and hopefully they can continue this momentum throughout, not just next week, but the playoffs as well. All right, that is going to do it for my Week 9 LPL overview and analysis of all 7 days of LPL action. Always a little bit of a marathon here in this video. But up on the screen right now, you're going to see the updated Week 9 standings with only one more week to go in the LPL. We've got a lot of teams that have either locked or been locked out of playoffs. Those will be highlighted in either green or red, depending on if they have clinched a playoff spot or been clinched out of the playoffs. In the first column, you're going to see my personal power rankings for each team. In the second column, you're going to see how that has changed this week. Let's go over the biggest risers, the biggest fallers, and everything in between. Some of the risers that I want to talk about this week. JDG leapfrogging RNG up to number 2. I think a lot of people are going to be upset by this because RNG beat them last week and they're on an 8-game win streak. But I like the upside of this JDG team just a little bit more than I like the upside of the RNG team. That's not to say that I think that they are very far apart at all. In fact, they're basically both at 2.5. I don't know. Something about this JDG team is really clicking for me right now, and I'm really hoping that they can continue this stretch throughout the rest of the year. Other leapfroggers here, ThunderTalk is going to leapfrog OMG after OMG had a little bit of a hiccup this week. And then ThunderTalk continues to just climb the rankings purely because nobody else is actually winning games. So they're sitting at 6 and 7, and they're actually at number 7 in my power rankings, which feels absurd for ThunderTalk, but I really feel like they're better than all the teams that I have them above. So definitely something there. LNG jumps up even after a really bad loss this week, purely because of everybody else being bad. They leapfrog FPX, who have really started to collapse as a team overall. And then the other leapfrog here is going to be BLG jumping up above Anyone's Legend. Anyone's Legend sitting at 7-7, 7th in the standings. I actually have them at number 12 in my power rankings. I really don't think they're a very good team at all. In fact, I think almost every other team that is above them is better than them. I do think they have a relatively okay chance of making playoffs, but a lot's going to, again, to have to go right for them because they're going to go 7-9 probably next week. So they are probably going to have to get a lot of things right, across the league in order for me to really believe that they're going to make playoffs. But, they're in a decent spot right now, maybe not the worst in the world. Other risers, Rare Atom gets a pretty big upset this week and therefore jumps up to number 14. They are officially eliminated from playoffs, and they're not better than Invictus Gaming or anything like that, but, they're probably better than the other teams that are kind of in rock bottom mode right now. So Ultra Prime and LGD fall down to 15 and 16, respectively. But that's it for the power rankings. Moving on to my player of the week and my dud of the week here for week 9 in the LPL. My week 9 player of the week. It was a very close decision here. And I went back and forth all week long trying to decide who to pick. I ended up going with Yagao on JD Gaming as my week 9 player of the week. He was phenomenal this week. He was a really big reason why JDG kind of bounced back after the RNG loss, got 2 more wins this week, and continued to sit in first place in the LPL standings. Yagao has been genuinely phenomenal, and I feel very frustrated that him and my second place player, I'll just say it, him and Rookie were so close for me. If you want to give Rookie player of the week, I completely understand, but I'm going to give it to Yagao. Both of them really deserved it this week, and it's unfortunate that one of them has to not get it in this week. But moving on to my dud of the week here in week 9, this one was a relatively easy decision. And my dud of the week in week 9 is going to go to Zoom on Ultra Prime, who just continues to fall from grace. He has pretty much convinced me that he's the worst top laner in the league at this point. Not only does he call for resources and then do nothing with them, but he doesn't even win when he's on weak side. So I really don't have a lot of confidence that Zoom is going to get a job next year. But yeah, it was a pretty easy choice here. Week 9 dud of the week is Zoom. And my week 9 player of the week is Yagao with a very, very close honorable mention to Rookie here on Victory 5. But that is going to do it for my week 9 LPL video. If you guys enjoyed, please go ahead and leave a like. It really does help out the channel a ton. And of course, let me know down in the comment section below all your thoughts on the week, your game of the week, your player of the week, your dud of the week, what team is overrated in my power rankings, what team is underrated in my power rankings. I love listening to you guys on all of that kind of stuff. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.